So it finally happened. We blew our first laser tube. I'm currently 4 weeks behind on work, and this thing was like $850. So we're gonna take it out of the crate, throw it in the laser, and reconfigure the whole setup.
And this thing came freight. I already opened it up once just to make sure nothing was broken, since I didn't have time to deal with it that specific day it came. And this thing came packaged pretty well. Just like the laser, it had this like spray foam filling all the way around it and really packed it in tight. I also got a couple different size lens tubes to hopefully squeeze as much performance out of this thing as I possibly can. First, we're going to drag this chiller out of the way, drain it, and get as much water out of the tube as we possibly can. Then raise these adjustable feet so it's back on its wheels. Then, as expected, it's super dusty back there. Some quick vacuum action, and it cleaned it up pretty quick. Taking out the tube and installing it isn't very hard at all. It's simply 2 wires and then just loosen these 2 brackets and pull it out. And I had no idea all this water collected in here. I didn't even notice it when it was in the tube and installed in the laser, and this is definitely not right. There should only be water on the inner tube and not like the large void area inside the tube itself. And this thing's just glass, and it was far too big to fit in my recycling bin, so we're going to smash it for your viewing pleasure.
Wow. Oh, there it goes.
Whoa.
What just happened?
That was the CO2.
It being pressurized definitely scared me a little bit, and these things are far more durable than I expected. And onto the new tube. Reattach the 2 outside wires that complete the circuit and just snug up these little brackets, and we're pretty much good to go. And then do about 1.5 finger to 2 finger width away from the first mirror. Then when you attach the second wire on this side of the tube, there's this little red rubber thing you screw on there to seal it all up. Then put the chiller back in its home and fill it back up with distilled water. So I posted about this on Instagram, and I got a bunch of good advice. So the first advice was to let this thing run for quite a while to make sure all them bubbles get out of there. Them little bubbles can cause cracking on this inside of the tube, I guess. Which honestly could have been the first reason it cracked the first time. Maybe all the bubbles weren't out of there. And you can see I let this thing run for quite a while before all the bubbles got out of the tube. So I'm definitely going to be better about letting this thing run a little longer before I start just firing the laser. Then just give it a quick test fire before we move on.
Boop. So before we jump into the setting up the mirrors and checking out them lenses, let's talk about like the main reason I made this video. If you're new to lasers or you're looking to buy a CO2 laser, you need to be aware that these tubes can be shoddy. This is a Reese tube, which is a reputable brand based on my Google research. I'm by no means an expert, so if you have any like tips for new people or tips for me, please leave them in the comments. I'll gladly hear you out. These do come with a 1-year warranty, and they claim they last minimum 1.5 years and 1,000 to 10,000 hours. I honestly don't even think I touched the 1,000 hours. You can see there's a tiny little crack in here where the laser's produced, and it shoots it through this tube. And I'll show a close-up of that, but I honestly don't know what caused it. But I'm assuming that's what made it fail. And you can also see there's water in here. I'd never run it over 80%, and my shop never gets below 60 degrees. I run water in here with a chiller, and I honestly can't tell you what happened. I think I might have just got a shoddy tube from the beginning. All that really matters is it was past the warranty and I had to get a new tube. These tubes are $850, and it took 3 weeks to get to me. So Jess had to go message all of our customers and be like, hey, it's going to be another month until we can get you your product because our machine broke down. So if you're really on a budget, you need to budget for having to buy a new tube. So if you're making money with your laser, put some money aside in case you got to get a new tube, because if you're crammed with orders and your tube goes out, you're out of work for 3 weeks, and that would be super frustrating. Or if you're someone that's going to be running this thing multiple days a week, I would almost have another one on hand, because if you're that busy and that stacked up with orders where you're running this thing for days on end, you just can't justify being shut down for 3 weeks. I've had this thing for almost 2 years, and it says on here that this tube was made in 2021. I've heard of people's tubes lasting anywhere from 6 months to 5 years. I mean, it depends on how much you use it. The longevity of the tube essentially what they say goes by, there's gases inside of this tube, and that's what creates the laser beam that shoots it out. They recommend you don't run these over 80% power.
Okay, timeout. I said 80% power, but what I should really say is 25 milliamps. And on our last laser tube, 75% power was about 25 milliamps. And this new tube we just installed is about 70% power to hit the 25 milliamps. And you should really keep it under that amount or it degrades the life of the tube drastically.
And that you keep it in a climate controlled environment, because if your shop gets really cold and this liquid inside here freezes, your tube's gonna be trash. My shop never goes under 60, so that's not what happened to this one. I never run it over 80%. Pretty much what I found out online is it's kind of luck of the draw with these tubes. Again, they could last 6 months, they could last 5 years. It depends how much you use it, how hard you are on your laser. And I've also talked to people that have, I don't know what brand tube they were going through, but they ended up getting 4 tubes before they finally got a good CO2 laser tube. I saw this exact tube on Amazon for $1,000. And then I got this from Laguna, and it was $850 with shipping. So also make sure you're getting them from a reputable resource. So whoever laser you have, I would probably order the tube through them, because I've read online that people are selling like knockoff tubes. Like they're taking the cheap ones and like putting different stickers on them or whatever and selling them for top dollar when it's just a crap tube.
And after recording this segment, I noticed this verification code on here, so I thought this was interesting. So I quick scanned it, and this is what came up. So always check this and make sure it goes directly to the Reese Laser Tube website. And now that we know the laser tube works, let's put this thing back in its home and redo these mirrors, because there's no way they're lining up like they did before I moved it, and swap the tube. But first, I'm going to give everything a quick wipe down and then re-grease these little rails. And this is just regular basic grease. I'm just going to throw this on the rails and then just work it in a little bit. So now that it's where I want it, I'm going to raise up these adjustable feet so it's not sitting on the wheels, so it's nice and stable while it's running, and then ensure everything's nice and level. And then since it's hard to get to this back mirror since it's in the corner of our shop, I had Jess come help me so I didn't have to crawl in and out of here every time I needed to fire the laser. I'll go into detail on kind of how I did all this in a minute. Then all we're doing is firing the laser with the gantry all the way in the back, moving it forward, and trying to line those dots up the best we can. And then I had my laser power set to 18% because this laser specifically will not fire under 15%. So make sure those numbers are correct with your machine specifically. Then we got mirrors 1 and 2 pretty quick, and here's the results. And then I end up switching to white tape later on. I'll explain that later. But pretty much you're just creasing the circle so you can see the center of the hole when you fire the laser. And you're trying to line this up in the very center as much as you can. And as you can see here, mirror 2 to 3 is not right. And the basics of it, you're just coming over here, adjusting these little screws until you get them to line up exactly how you want it. This can be way harder than it looks and super frustrating, and I was still struggling getting mirror 2 to 3, so I hit up YouTube.
So instead of moving just this one like the manual says to get it to move up or down, I actually move both of these out at the same time to move it up, or out to move it down. Versus this one, if you just move this mirror, you're just pushing this top corner in. Versus if you move these guys, you're pushing the entire mirror out. Which is why I think I was getting issues aligning it from over here to over there.
And this is a screenshot from the manual. It's just very basic and doesn't give you a ton of information. I believe they have a YouTube video on their channel, but this is why YouTube's your friend.
And I also found a guy on YouTube. I'll link him in the description, but he puts a bunch of pieces of tape on here, puts a little hashtag around it. Now I'll put one piece of tape over it, and then when I move it over there and fire it, I can still see through there without having to change this tape a bunch of times. Okay, so I finally got it to hit in all 4 corners, pretty much as close as I can in the middle. 2 major takeaways I learned from this. A, when you're moving these mirrors, in the manual it says move this to go up and down. Sure, but you also need to move these 2 to get it to go up and down until they line up all over the place. Because if you just move this one, it'll hit center here, but end up not hitting center over there. Another major tip I found out is when you get it hitting center here, line the red dot up with exactly where your laser beam's hitting, because then when you're moving these mirrors, you can see how much that thing's actually moving versus just trying to guess. And like when I'm fine tuning it all over the place, I'm doing like micro adjustments.
And I would say this was probably the biggest help in really dialing in these mirrors, because you can actually see where that red dot's hitting and where your laser beam's gonna hit when you're doing those micro adjustments on that mirror. So I highly recommend trying this out. And just because that beam hits center here in the middle of the bed doesn't mean those beams are lining up in the center all over the work area, which is what I was struggling to get. And onto the last mirror. This one I've seen people use electrical tape, masking tape. Masking tape seemed to work fine here, but you're just lining up this mirror to shoot straight down the center of the nozzle. It was a little bit harder to tell. It looked pretty center. I did a bunch of tests and they looked pretty good to me.
So this time around, I really wanted to dial these in, and I've been messing with these things for just over like an hour and a half, and I think I finally got it, and I'll link to the videos that help me out in the description. Hopefully it helps you, because every new laser owner knows that adjusting the mirrors just kind of suck until you really get it, and once you really get it, you can do it in like 10-15 minutes, but I just really wanted to understand it this time around to make sure there was no errors on my part or with this new tube. So now I'm going to go around and clean all the mirrors with the isopropyl alcohol and just cotton swabs to make sure there's no gunk on the mirrors, because I read somewhere that dirty mirrors can contribute to 10 to 30% or something like that power loss just with dirty mirrors alone. So I'm going to make sure those are super clean, and then we're going to level the bed.
So this part's super important too, because just because your mirrors are lined up, if one end is lower by 1/8 inch, your focal distance is going to be off. So what I did was went around with the CNC bit, it doesn't matter what, but just to make sure that the distance in each corner was the same distance away from the nozzle. This time around everything checked out, but when I first got it, it was a tiny bit off. And all I did was take off the tension of this belt here and then just twist these very slightly with my hand until I got the desired height in each corner. And this part's sped up, but I'm just doing a test cut on this random piece of scrap with the original nozzle just to make sure everything checks out. And to give me a basis based on this new nozzle we're about to put in. And these actually go in super easy. Pretty much just unhook the air hose and then slide it in and tighten these 2 screws. A lot easier than I anticipated. And then here's the first cut with the new tube. This is real speed. I'll show the difference in light burn in a little bit here.
So I wanted to get the most out of the machine, so I ended up trying some different tubes here. I just got these off of Laguna's website. But this is the original tube, and one thing I didn't really ever realize was you got to take this thing apart and clean this lens in here. It's just something I always overlooked and didn't really realize how dirty it was until I took off this tube to swap out this new tube. And I ended up getting a short tube, which is great for engraving and etching. And then I ended up getting this tube, which I didn't realize was essentially the exact replacement for the stock tube on this. So I'll have to get a 4-inch tube, which is better for cutting. So just swapping out this tube was a pretty big improvement. I'll go into light burn and show you how much it actually changed.
And all I did was change the stock lens tube to this new photonics tube, and this one was running at 20 speed, 65 power to cut single pass through this MDF, and the original tube was cutting at 1870 to get a clean cut, single pass.
Another major difference between the stock lens and this new aftermarket lens is the focal distance. The focal distance on this guy was about 1/4 inch, which is just kind of annoying when you're trying to etch in the bottom of bowls and whatnot. Versus this new one, the Photonics has about 1/2 inch focal distance. So that's also something else to consider. So if you're interested in getting new lenses, I'd highly recommend it because it did make a noticeable difference. So would I buy a laser again? Absolutely. I love having a laser in the shop. The initial hurdle, figuring out the mirrors and all that, can be pretty frustrating, but once you get it down, you can probably do it in like 10-15 minutes. Hopefully in the near future, they can just come out with some auto-adjust mirrors that just do it for you when you push a button, but you just need to realize they're not plug-and-play units. And this machine has been great to us, other than the tube taking a premature crap, but that's not Laguna's fault. They don't like make the tubes. It's just kind of the business of owning a laser. Even if you have a fiber laser, those things have a tube in them too. The diode lasers do not have a tube in them, but them are great for like etching and like little desktop stuff. So that might be a great starting point. So the reason I went with the Laguna laser was I just felt like it was a good middle of the road laser. There's Epilog, which is like $20,000+, and that's just a whole different machine. And then there's like Omtech, which is just cheaper, and I was worried about the quality of it and then not having customer service, versus Laguna, I can just call customer service and they'll help me out and get me parts or whatever I need. And then there's like Glowforge, which is just too small of a machine for me, and they just kind of seem overpriced for what they are. But it's a good starting point. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I learned a lot throughout this whole process. It sucked I had to get a new tube and go through all that, but I learned a lot along the way, and I hope you guys did too.